We can go. Okay. I think you liked this yesterday. We will do this, but we will not break the glass. It's a good welcome on a winter day, 2nd of December, Under Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Madam Christina Duarte, Excellencies, representatives of member states, distinguished professors, academics, panelists, policy makers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning here in New York. And we are not just present here in Conference Room 2 at UN headquarters. We have others joining us live online around the world. My name is Ben Dotse Malo from UN News. I welcome you this Tuesday morning, day number 2 of this year's academic conference on Africa, organized by the Office of the UN Special Advisor on Africa, led by Under Secretary General Christina Duarte. On her behalf, I just want to thank our distinguished keynote speaker from yesterday, distinguished professor, novelist, a man believed to be of Nobel quality, Professor Nuruddin Farah. Would you put your hands together and thank him? He made me remember the corporal punishment I used to get in primary school. But that's okay, he taught a good lesson. And we thank all the panelists from yesterday, especially Professor Kweyi Soyinka Ariwele. We thank you very much. Today, the theme and the subject that is bringing all of us together is transforming the state, reclaiming the future, pathways to African renewal. Transforming the state, reclaiming the future, pathways to African renewal. This presupposes that we need transformation in Africa. We need reclamation in Africa, and we need renewal for Africa and for the benefit of all Africans, those on the continent and those in the diaspora. What would it take to transform the African state? If we accept that state presence is weak and that is a huge problem across the continent, then what must be done to give Africa a better future? The African Union has chosen reparations as the theme for 2025. How can reparations be delivered in a way that is just, that is totally beneficial and fair? Before we go on, please let me remind all of us that we have both French and English interpretation. If you need at any point, the translators, the interpreters are available. You just use your headpiece. One more thing, as we are here, I'm sure we all have our mobile devices, preferably on vibrate, and we want you to be able to tell your friends where you are. You go on webtv.un.org, and they will be able to join and see what is going on here and participate. Also on YouTube, you can refer people to YouTube and give them the phrase Academic Conference on Africa 2025. And you will be able to get people to join everything that is going on here live. Once again, it's webtv.un.org, either that or YouTube. Over the next 3 hours, we will have a panel discussion, and then the last hour from 12 to 1 p.m. sharp, the floor will be open to everybody here in Conference Room 2 and everybody who is online submitting any questions, any clarifications, any solutions for the transformation of Africa. You can go online on YouTube and present that. or whilst we are here, as you are listening to the panelists, an idea, a thought, a recommendation, some wisdom comes and you want to express, just take note, because we will be coming to you from 12 noon until 1 p.m. sharp, when the interpreters would be gone. We need everybody to be engaged and to be involved. Now, Excellencies, distinguished guests, my brothers and sisters, another great panel of experts, thinkers, people with some wisdom to share with us. And I will mention in the introduction Professor Leonard Wanchekon, who is a professor of politics and international affairs, Princeton University, and founder of the African School of Economics. Could you give him a round of applause, please? I would also like to welcome, with your support, a distinguished Nigerian, a distinguished African who kind of traverses both policy making, governance, and then academia. She's a professor of law at the University of Arizona, a former minister of mines and steel development for no other nation than the nation that calls itself the giant of Africa. I was teasing her that if she were corrupt, she probably wouldn't be here this morning. She should have a lot of Nigerian steel in her pocket, but she is not. Professor Leslie Obiora, please welcome her. Under Secretary General Christina Duarte, we welcome you. Okay. And then we have Professor Nadej Compaore, who is an assistant professor of international relations at the Department of Political Science, University of Toronto. Please give her a round of applause as we welcome her. The last but not the least, the Burkinabe among us is clapping more than everybody. I should be joining you because Ghanaians consider themselves part of Burkina Faso. Anyway, those are the Pan-Africanists. Ladies and gentlemen, last but not the least, the man who is going to be the moderator for us this morning and take over the job away from me, an assistant professor of politics, Fairfield University, chair of the Global South Caucus for International Studies and International Studies Association, Professor Lembe Tiki. Professor Tiki, did you come here with some of your fans? Because on that note, I am handing over to you to take us through the panel discussion with the distinguished professors and panelists. Please put your hands together as I hand over to him. Thank you.
There we go. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And welcome to session 2. It's great to be here. And I'm saying this on behalf of all the panelists sitting here. We are happy to be here and to pursue the discussion that began yesterday. We'll pick up from where they left. It was a great conversation. But as you heard everyone saying, including the panelists yesterday, everything will happen today. So it's today that we'll solve all the problems today. So we will discuss, our session we'll focus on the state, as my brother said. We'll focus on the state, its renewal. We will discuss its future also. And we're doing this given the international context. And the international context is that of a transitional order. We're moving from one international order to the next, and we'll discuss that in a few. And so today, some of the questions that we'll discuss include rebuilding the democratic institutions of the African state. We'll talk about political stability, centering on the participation of the people, the African people. Today's conversation will also include economic topics, natural resources for sure, and natural resources governance. We'll discuss reparation. As you heard the the MC saying that the African Union decided that 2025 is going to be the year of reparations. We'll talk about illicit financial flows, fiscal and monetary policies. And then we'll talk a lot about reforms, including digital tools, justice, we already said institutions. But we'll focus on how to increase human development. Now, I have to say something. Now, so when I received the invitation to come, I just wondered, why? Why am I being invited? And I asked the question because I don't know that in the past I've been very, that I've applauded the work of international organizations when it comes to Africa, so including the World Bank, the IMF, but also the United Nations. I don't want to give the United Nations a pass, not only because I'm here. But then in that questioning, I received some sort of assurance that the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa wanted a candid conversation. So today the word on the street is candid. You know, all of us here, we are going to express our perspectives in a candid way, in a truthful way. Right? We are not going to hold back anything. And this is what the panelists are going to do, and we invite everyone in the public to do so. And so, to begin, even though we are here in a global North institution, I would like to do things the African way. And that is, there is no way that we will begin this conversation with me speaking, giving my perspectives, when I am surrounded by two elders. So we'll turn the mic to Professor Leonard Wancheko, who, and by the way, each one of us, so to tell you how things are going to go, each of us up here, are going to have 5 to 7 minutes to give our introductory remarks. After those 7 minutes, we'll have a conversation here. We'll ask each other's questions. We will comment on some of the arguments advanced. And after that, will take us to about an hour. And after that, we'll have our respondent that will also give us their perspective on things that we said, and maybe not. They will just give us their different perspectives. And that will also take us about an hour. And from there, we'll go to the public. And again, please remember, the conversation is candid. That's the word on the street today. All right, with that, I'm going to turn to my left to Professor Leonard Wancheko. Okay, so please.
Okay. All right. It's a true pleasure and honor to be here today. Before I give my address, I would like to introduce myself a little bit more for two reasons. First, because I would like each of you maybe to reach out to me afterwards to learn more about what I'm doing and to get, maybe some useful advice, because I have a very peculiar and very unique background. And also because I feel like my work, past and present, try to promote not only excellence, but also agency. So currently, I'm a professor, Jane Madison Professor of Political Economy at Princeton University. I'm also the founder of African School of Economics. My research is on political economy, but a very different type of political economy. My research is to make political economy problem-solving oriented. So my research is about how you can actually make government work, how you can reform the state effectively for growth and for peace and prosperity. But there are two parts of me that maybe not known is I'm a historian. So I was the
the historical advisor of the movie The Woman King by Hollywood. That based on my work on the female warriors of Benin from 17th century, and actually finishing a book that provides the biographies of 51 of them, so that we demystify those women. I'm also a lot of focus on slavery, not only, like the impact of slavery, but also working on the return of free slaves from Brazil, from the Caribbeans, and then from the US, So, and last not least, I was most of my teenage years and up a political activist. So I organized student uprising. I was a member of the shadow government of the military dictatorship in Benin in the 70s, and I paid a very heavy price. I was arrested. I spent 18 months in prison. And next year will be the 40th anniversary of my escape from high security prison in Benin, December 5th, 1986. So, and I'm going to celebrate that, So those who want to be invited, yeah, because you hear quite a bit about those days. Now, I'm going to make 2 points, no, 3 actually. The first one is that transforming states is about technological progress. It's about collective agency. It's about social cohesion. We tend to think that wealth makes states stronger. But in fact, what makes states stronger is the combination of social infrastructure and technological progress. If you take historically, roads, electricity, discovery in medical science, all those discoveries, all those scientific progress were key to state capacity and to development. If you want to talk in economic terms, if you take the difference in growth between countries, less than 50% come from capital and labor. Most come from technological progress and what is called total factor productivity, which is another way to talk about social infrastructure. So in Africa, the issues of weak state capacity is an issue of weak technological capacity. So we spend too little on science and technology. We, even foreign direct investments or foreign trade, foreign aid is less than 1.4%, research and development. And besides that, beside this weak investment in technology, institutions are not built to promote social cohesion, to promote agency, to promote empowerment. I'm not saying that for this to happen, you have to throw out everything that exists currently. What you need to do is to try to understand why states is weak along those dimensions and find reforms like genetic editing to some degree, where you identify where the problem is and you find ways to reform it. Let me give you an example. I just completed a study in Benin where a lot of corruption, incompetency, and ineffectiveness of local governments, despite the fact that every year there is audit reports that point to why this is happening. So instead of just complaining about that and say, Africa is corrupt, local government is corrupt, this is what I did. I proposed to a number of local governments to insert a deliberation procedure, closed-door deliberation procedure of the staff to discuss the content of the audit report. So I bring this kind of African culture of deliberation in governments, local governments. So people in those places, they closed door, they went out after each other, they discuss what works, what doesn't, and they point to, they did a finger pointing to each other. The following year, there is a huge improvement in performance, a decline in corruption. Not by an outside expert, by just people closed door, looking at each other in the eyes and say, we shouldn't be doing this to ourselves, And as a result, we have improvement. So this example is important for two reasons. First, because it shows that some minor edit to the existing institutions can make a difference. Because all I did was just say, meet. When the reports are in, meet, talk things over before I go to the mayor. And that led to this improvement. That's one point. The second is about bringing African culture to government. I mean, we talk about it, but how do you do it concretely? The way you do it by saying, in Africa, we talk things over. We meet, we go after each other, either in public or private, So, yeah. So, and this is how, this is one way to do it, So, and the mechanism here is that deliberation not only help information sharing, social cohesion, and led to, major improvement, in outcome. And I use this example to actually to show how states can be, state capacity can be improved with some minor reforms, and how we can introduce our cultural background into way we make the states work. And let me leave it there, and I'll be talking to you about other work that I'm doing that speak to this big issue of state transformation on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Prof. We are going to go straight to you, Prof. Obiora.
I love Leonard's analogy with, after all these years, I have thought to myself, what is development if not what we had been doing previously, excuse me. But please, with your kind permission, I'm just going to go to a script of my opening remarks, and then we would have our exchange. So again, I applaud the initiative of the Undersecretary General. This is especially weighing the undeniable crisis of the African state against the centrality of the state for the purposes of the United Nations. Your commitment to institutionalize data-driven support offers a watershed to help embed a meaningful research and development ecosystem to improve the business of the state in Africa, just like Leonard had illustrated. Successful private sector organizations prioritize research and development as a core strategy for growth. Beyond routinizing stuff like monitoring and evaluation for projects and the likes, the African state is overdue to integrate a systematic learning approach in solving the pressing problems of the day. This is key to energizing entrepreneurial mindsets. Chief among the pressing problems of the day is the need to troubleshoot the conditions that attenuate the fundamentals that account for the integrity of the theory and practice of the sovereignty in the African context at present. This shortfall has made a caricature of the Westphalian state paradigm that African countries assumed at independence. The UN takes this paradigm as a given in working with African states. Yet, the recurrent feedback from the field, echoed at the opening of this conference yesterday, demonstrates the difficulty of this assumption. As the session unfolded yesterday, revisiting the challenges of the state gave me a headache. Yet this deepened my appreciation of the proposition for your office to help narrow the gap between academic critics and policy responses. We touched on the value of harnessing your convening power as a form of capital that can offset financial constraints immeasurably. For example, this could help train the muscle to prove the concept that it is possible to transcend the tensions that typically define the relationship between the government and academics who embody or champion civil society aspirations. The brilliance of your objective is that it aims to invigorate the international civil society, which is apt to collaborate with national civil servants. These functionaries are more significant than transient elected politicians in building capacity and trust to enable enduring homegrown change. This, for me, is the heart of the matter. How can we institutionalize the capacity for constructive dialogue to mutually enrich the learning that is critical for our collective growth? In my understanding, your office has enormous capacity to evolve an incubation lab of sorts to marry the strengths of academia and policymakers in indigenizing, with an underscore on indigenizing, the concept of the sovereignty of the African state for win-win solutions. Yesterday, Professor Farah illustrated the inequities of interstate relations with the case of Canada's stylized conversion of Nigeria's assets. I suggested that the office of the USG is tailor-made as a diplomatic channel to broker conversations that promise to test pathways to balance these disparities. Further, I articulated my curiosity about the breach between the state and the society in contemporary Nigeria, for example. This is despite the history of how the British colonial administration mobilized vibrant indigenous apparatus of governance to exercise hegemony on a shoestring, as the African historian Sarah Berry once put it. What became of such apparatus today? In a recent piece in the Journal of African History, I analyzed how the controversy surrounding the return of the Benin bronzes captured the force, if not the indispensability, of the traditional apparatus of governance for cultural heritage protection, and the irony of the elision of such traditional authority in the UNESCO Cultural Heritage Conventions. I guess the bottom line of my point is that there really isn't anything that is new in what we're trying to accomplish. The problem is that we have assumed a nature that's not ours, and if we can go back, just like Leonard had demonstrated with his work at the grassroots, with the local governments, I forget who he worked with, that this is African democracy. We can sit amongst ourselves, as my people in Igbo language say, wise, tokatisi, put our heads together, fight each other, hash it out amongst ourselves, see what we can borrow from wherever, and quite frankly, begin to figure out how we can exercise our agency in ways that are much more readily amenable to the conditions that we find ourselves in. And I'm going to just stop here and trust that in the question and answer or in further discussions that I would have opportunity to elaborate more on what I need to say. I timed myself. I didn't want to go beyond my 7 minutes, and it's going to come up. So I have 1 more minute, which you can take, Professor Kampore. Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Again, no translation here. We're going to shift it to our esteemed colleague, Professor Nadej Kampore.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the extra minute. I also tried to time myself with my remarks, so we'll see how I do. And thank you to our fantastic hosts and organizers for inviting me. Thank you everyone for being here as well, despite the rain. It's a pleasure to be with you all. 10 years ago, when Trevor Noah was the host of The Daily Show, I don't know how many fans of The Daily Show are here, one of his segments focused on the 70th regular session of the UN General Assembly that was held here, of course. And during his specific segment, I was hard at work on my thesis, and this was one of my breaks to watch. He showed a photo of the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni. Whatever we think of him is not my commentary. But what was interesting is that he contrasted the picture of Museveni giving his speech, and most of the reporters were out of the room, charging their laptops and their phones. And the commentary was satirical, of course, but the images were real. And Noah's suggestion was that the media was there to listen to some state actors, but not others. And so essentially, African state actors were not the draw in these UN halls. So we know that all states are not created equal, and we know that we are in an international state system that is hierarchical. We have the great powers, middle, emerging, small powers. And so what happens when African states seeking to confront the status quo and push for real agency and to have more legitimate place in the international system? And we've, of course, been all witnessing the challenges of South Africa hosting the G20 this year and the continuing repercussions, even as we speak, including potential membership and potential inclusion at the next G20 summit. I wanted to start with these imagery and challenges of African state presence and representation at an international stage to remind us of the real structures that explain why African states, in their processes of state-making, have not only been focused on the domestic level, but have also always been very intensely outward-looking, given that a state is a state through international recognition. So I would argue that this constant posture of seeking international recognition has led to state validation mechanisms which paradoxically replicate the very colonial logic that African states have sought to liberate themselves from. So the core colonial logic at play for me here is that of extractivism. I think the future of the African state is one that needs to confront these tensions between extractivism and aspirations of environmentalism. And I'm suggesting that despite sweeping resource nationalism across the continent, African states are replicating legacies of colonialism in the governance of their natural resources in many ways, but I want to focus on two ways here. First, by subordinating environmental concerns to the logic and norms of extractivism that are market-driven, and second, by excluding non-state community-level actors from the very process of resource governance. So in a sense, although we have been talking about state absence and state weakness in the conference so far, even this morning, I want to suggest that there's perhaps actually within resource governance on the continent too much state power, in the sense that grassroots and community level input have been marginalized from key decision-making processes. So in this context, transforming African states and seeking pathways to renewal necessarily has to take seriously these tensions of extractivism and environmentalism. And I want to quickly propose two areas of focus while we wait for the discussion later. First, I want to bring us back to the UN as we're here, and specifically the UN Principle on Permanent Sovereignty over Natural Resources, which is Resolution 1803, adopted in 1962 to unpack how this principle can better serve Africa today, beyond the rhetoric of sovereignty specifically, and by using it to create a more participatory governance process. And I think that should start by asking, whose sovereignty are we talking about? For instance, there's a need to have more people-centered popular sovereignty than just state sovereignty when thinking of resource governance. It's actually in asking this type of questions that we've come to have related principles such as the free, prior, informed consent when planning resource extraction schemes. And also asking how permanent this sovereignty is. because it's also in asking these types of questions that we tend to look into the type of international partnerships, whether it's bilateral or multilateral or corporate. For instance, unfavorable taxation, insufficient consultation with community level members, unfair contracts happen when the state actually removes or suspends its sovereignty and gives it to a corporate actor or to an international actor because it favors that actor. And the second area of focus is moving towards a more collective movement from African states, and that has already been raised a little bit today. As we rethink international partnerships, I know that things have been moving away from our traditional former colonial partners and other Western allies towards allies such as Russia and China. But I think there is some initiatives moving in that direction in terms of collective action. For instance, there's the 2023 Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change by the African Union member states, which highlights claims of loss and damage funds as a justice framework to anchor better terms for African agency amidst the climate crisis. So I think staying vigilant through this collective agency is perhaps a way to build more justice within the sovereignty system and leverage the intense interest in Africa's critical minerals in a strong and strategic focus. I know that just a week ago, there was the EU-AU summit in Luanda, which was, of course, focused on strategic minerals on the part of Africa. So I'm going to stop here. I think maybe I've exhausted the 7 minutes, but my main point here is that as African states continue their process of international state validation within the international system to try and claim more legitimacy, the Pan-Africanist ideals of solidarity and collective liberation should be at the core of our processes. So these were my initial thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Compaoré. All right, so it's my turn, and I hope you had given me your minute, your additional minute, because I think I'm going to go.
I showed how to stay
She took
in
it?
line.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to use my privilege as moderator to take more than 7 minutes, but maybe I won't do that. So I would like to contextualize things. Right? I would like to discuss the conditions. Well, first of all, let me just start by saying, I think most of us here, or maybe all of us, we agree that the African state is in crisis. And by that, we mean that the African state is not delivering its promises. So that's the point of departure, and I guess that's why we are here, right? And so if the African state in general, if again, we're speaking here generally, is not delivering its promises, then from my perspective, I think we have to understand the conditions under which the African state is operating. We cannot avoid that conversation. So for me, my opening remarks, I'm going to structure them around 2 questions. The first one would be about the distribution of power in the international system. And the second question will be about the goals of the state. So first, and we cannot, again, avoid that question, is about the creation of contemporary African states. So looking at the distribution of power, at the time that this organization called African States was created, we are in the years, we are operating in a multipolar world order under European control, so dominated by European powers. So when the colonial states were created, the multipolar world order was under European domination. So the conditions put together allowed Europeans to go abroad and create these new organizations. So that's question number one. And by the way, in that multipolar environment, European multipolar environment, we're talking about 5 to 7 countries that are about equal power, equal strength. And so they are in competition among themselves. And that competition led them to the world, including Africa, where they created the colonial state. So that is the first question, the conditions. The second question will be about the goals. So what was the goal of the African state that was created in the 19th century? We're talking about the Berlin Conference. We don't want to go there. All right, so the goals of the state created by European powers was to enrich Europeans, right? Okay. It wasn't about providing well-being to the Africans. In fact, enriching Europeans meant forced labor, resource extraction, right? So wealth going into one direction, and one direction only, so from Africa to Europe. We fast forward to a change of conditions. Back to that question number one. Conditions changed in 1945, when the European world order collapsed after World War II. A new world order emerged with two superpowers, the United States and the Allies, of course, and the Soviet Union and the Allies. And the rivalry between these two superpowers structured international relations, and the behavior of all other states in that environment. Now, what was the goal of the African states in that environment? Continue the extraction of natural resources that goes to Europe and maybe to the United States at this point. Obviously, American multinational corporations are dominating the international system. So the goal of the state is to continue enriching European and Western powers, put it that way. But also, now we're talking about the 1960s, where African countries in majority became independent. So there was another subset of goals for the African leaders. It was to rebuild the state, or to build the state. So most of the institutions that were put together, economic institutions, were done so by the African leaders, right? They built an education system, because remember, during the colonial time, Europeans didn't build much, right? Portuguese, for example, and I'm not going to pick on Portugal here, but that's just an example, right? Spending 300 years in Guinea-Bissau or Angola, they left behind only a few graduates, college graduates. So it wasn't about building the state. Again, it was about extraction. Now, the leaders of the 1960s I'm repeating myself here, but tried to build the institutions, even though they were under conditions of limited agency, because they were still dominated by European and American powers this time. But they did build this institution, and I'm going to add one institution in the economic scene that African leaders built parastatals at this point, public-owned corporations. So we're going to fast forward. Again, some of these things are going to come up in the discussion. So we move from that period to the next change in the world order. That is 1991. The Soviet Union collapsed, and America became the only global power. So we enter a unipolar world system with one superpower dominating international relations. Now, African states now have to evolve, have to operate under conditions of unipolarity. So their behavior depends on how the hegemon, the United States, structure the world. And what the US did at this point is to advance what is called the liberal international order. So liberalism as a political philosophy and economic philosophy advanced by the United States in all corners of the world, so including African countries. They had to implement the Washington Consensus, for example, those 10 policy requirements that no one could escape at this point. The World Bank, our friends from the World Bank are not here, but that's okay. Because I wanted to go to them. And the IMF, and a few other agencies helped the United States to structure this space, this environment for African states. It was about, again, implementing the Washington. So those 10 policies, including things like deregulation, privatization. So the parastatal, the public-owned corporations that Africans created in the previous order, right, they were asked to give them up. Under the conditions of unipolarity, African countries were coerced in a certain way, to give up this. That's not me.
That's your
I wasn't calling. She timed up. She timed me out. So they were required to give up these parastatals. And who purchased them? Multinational corporations. Right? So, and then the second question I said that, so the first question again was about the distribution of power. The second question for African state was, well then what was the goals? What are some of the goals of the African state during that period? Frankly, the goal was to survive. Believe it or not, the liberal international order, the unipolar world order, was so violent. It was so violent that it led to several crises, economic crises and political crises in the continent. So I wanted to say something about the World Bank and the IMF. During that moment, not only they were asked to sell their public-owned corporations, get the state out of the economy, they were asked to use what is called comparative advantage. And that is to keep on producing more of these cash crops that colonialism put together. So we were still in a colonial economy where the World Bank and the IMF said, keep producing more of this because you are good at doing it, and you will use the proceeds, the revenues you get out of it, to pay our loans. So the African economies were structured to repay the loans. And I say this was a very violent moment because whenever African countries were unable to repay their loans because of the collapse of the price of these commodities, see, the World Bank and the IMF say, oh, this is the deal. You sell at this price, we're giving you loans, and you will be able to repay us. The problem is the price of these commodities collapse. So African countries are not able to reimburse. That's a debt trap. And what would the IMF and the World Bank do at this point? So no, take new loans. We're going to give you more loans. And everything is structured so that they will repay the loans. And by the way, they could only pay the servicing. They could only service the debt, which means they are not even talking about the principal. So yes, Madam Moderator, I'm going to end at this point by saying this. By saying this. Looking at the outcomes of the liberal international order. At this point, counting last year, the World Bank itself said the African debt stands at $1.2 trillion. And every year, last year, in 2024, African countries have to spend $163 billion to service the debt. We are not talking about the principal. Okay, so in the conversation, we'll discuss some of these things. We map out the situation. We are going to talk about the solutions at some point. All right.
I have a question for you.
You have a question for me? Please go ahead.
Yes. So I'm so thankful to God for our youth, the younger generation, in an age-stratified society like I come from. You know, they are a successor generation. So you can keep yelling at the outsiders. I'm looking in. Please help me understand how what you shared now has to do with the 92-year-old who just won the election in your country.
I didn't think I would be embarrassed here.
I think, Prof,
Yes.
many people don't know that
I will.
you are an African from Cameroon. So just giving context to this provocative question. But the watchword is candid, so we can be candid under the UN with Under Secretary General Duarte here protecting you. All right? Okay.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. Before I start answering this question, because they are watching. So, Madam Undersecretary, I'm under your protection right now. It's an embarrassing question. Yes, the 92-year-old president, and I know he's not listening because I guess he's asleep. He's not listening, right? He won the election.
It's the afternoon in Cameroon.
There we go, so he's asleep. He won the elections. And I am saying that the structure of the international system allowed these kind of things to happen. And I'm glad you asked me that question, because so for the research that we do, the research that we read, show that the unipolar moment, again, the liberal international order, that spurred globalization, put together institutions that allow these kind of things to happen. Without the liberal international, without some of these institutions, people like the leader of Cameroon, that I don't want to name, could be as corrupt as possible and enrich themselves beyond limits and remain in power. Why am I saying that? Because guess what? If you steal money in Cameroon or in any other African country, you don't put it under your bed. You don't put that money under your bed. That money, where is that money? We all know where that money is. And so the liberal international order, the liberal order, created conditions for this to happen. The money, I'm not giving any pass to any African leader who's doing this, right? But I'm saying that the condition would have been different, because you can't put that money under your bed. Everyone will know in that country that the money is under your bed, and you will be a target. But as long as the international system put the conditions to allow people, whether they are politicians, whether they are drug dealers, to move their asset from one corner of the world to another, where this behavior will continue, this bad behavior will continue.
Leonard, please, do you want to?
Please build on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that, okay, two things. So I agree with the states of the international power structure that contributed to the situation you are describing. But, at the same time, I think the key words for me should be agency. Because, the international community didn't order the killing of thousands and thousands of protesters across Africa. And in fact, the situation you describe is very similar to what's happening in many Eastern European countries as well. So if the international community, the international system might have played a role, it shouldn't be the only one, because many Eastern European countries and even in Latin America in the past, you have situations that are nearly identical. Okay. Now, the second point I wanted to make here is that I make for a long time as a principle that I spend 10% complaining and 90% doing something about it. When I was political activist back in Benin, I distributed leaflets in the evening. In the morning, I studied math hard, because I see myself as a solution in the future, and I need to be ready, So what I'm saying here is that we have to be, each of us has to be the solution, And it's very, very, very important that we see ourselves building energy, because, if I wake up every morning looking at all these things, I will be completely demoralized and I cannot do anything. So I have to keep some limit. I say, okay, it is what it is, but I need to think about how we get out of it. And that's what is lacking. How should we exactly, or to some degree, reform the international system? What should we push for so that we can have an opening? That will change the situation. So I think it's important that we also spend some time on how we push for real and meaningful change, what kind of policy, what kind of action we need to be involved in, to help this. I know, for instance, like in France, there is a group that, try to shame African leaders who have mentions in France. they are doing something. They try to get everybody aware of this tragedy, you know. So, and I think, I'm not saying we should be doing that exactly, but, you know, no, what I'm saying, it's important that we take actions and then we think of effective action that can help change the balance of power internationally so that when the opportunity comes, we can push for it very hard. But saying, this is what we want, this is what should happen. You know, anyway, so I'm just trying to complement your answer by saying agency is really, really important as a solution, you know, to this. Yeah.
Sure. And Leslie would like to build upon what you're saying.
Kind of.
Please bounce on that.
Okay. So I remember, I think his name is Eugene Robinson, who was a Washington Post journalist. I remember one MLK holiday, and he gave a tribute to MLK and just waxed eloquent about all that we celebrate about MLK and all that, and, you know, lamented the gap that the deaths of the likes of him have left, and that the generation today is very different. And, you know, we're all sitting and waiting for someone to rescue us and some leader to rise up in our communities. And he ended up that tribute with, you know, an admonition that said, if you're still one of us who are sitting and nostalgic for those days, you should look in the mirror. And who do you see when you look in the mirror? It is you, you know. So when I heard that, it actually did encourage me along the lines of what Leonard is doing. I have a low threshold for pain, so if you want to imprison me, you'd rather kill me before, you know, torturing me and all that. But so I haven't gone to his level of activism, but just like he started his own institution, I'm just about to start my own modest institution, you know, trying to figure out my incremental way of succession planning, training the next generation, you know, working with the poorest of the poor, most talented poorest of the poor, and trying to figure out how to give them quality education. But no matter what we do at the individual level, there's still, how are we going to scale that? How are we going to take it to the next level? And that's one of the reasons why, you know, forums like this are so important. And I emphasize the notion of succession planning because I think that is one of the worst problems that Africa faces today. It's a tragedy because there's actually a parallel between research and development and gerontocracy, which was a system of governance. They affirmed the authority of experience, right? So you see these elders now, they want to immortalize themselves in government because they've not invested in training the next generation. There was a young lady here yesterday who talked about how she wants to be president, and I'm glad she's listening and sitting at the feet of our elders and trying to learn and so on and so forth. What happened to those moments? Could we begin to figure out how to pipeline, you know, opportunities again for us to reclaim, you know, some of those? I have had opportunity to interact with some of these octogenarians and older ones who have been in government, and when they were in government, they were so heady, they thought, you know, that they were, some of them were actually very young. If you think of the Biafran Civil War, you know, Ojukwu was only in 32 or maybe younger. Gowon and all of them, they were in their 30s, and some of them were in their 20s. And when you see them older now and they're looking back, they basically they're much more amenable to revisiting some of those sins of their past and the mistakes that they made. And how is it that we're not able to institutionalize that kind of knowledge to help to use it to train the next generation? You know, none of the stuff that we're aspiring towards is rocket science. It's all about human agency. I mean, if the West can do it, there's no inherence in Africa that we cannot do it. He's talked about the external constraints that try to keep us where we are, but hey, that's what resistance is all about. If they're trying to keep me where I am, I'm just going to keep, even a 2-year-old knows how to resist. I'm just going to keep trying to push back and figure out how. But it comes back to the question that the keynote speaker asked yesterday. who are we? Do we even know who we are or what we're fighting for? And I think that's so critical. And again, thank you.
All right. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I would like to bounce back quickly, and then I pass the mic to. I would like to say this: that the Gramish Bank, in the experience of the Gramish Bank in the country of Bangladesh, that got Mohammed Yunus to win the Nobel Prize, was a great initiative because it helped get some people out of poverty in Bangladesh, especially women. It was a great initiative, and it is a good example of agency. Agency at the personal level, agency at the communal level. Right? This has to be applauded. And we applaud that. But we're saying that we need to consider, we will be forced not to consider the conditions, the global conditions we're operating in, right? Because, and then we can discuss that a bit later. But there are certain things that, and we all know this, that global North countries are doing to maintain global South countries where they are. Because it's not in the best interest of the leopard to free the gazelle. But then I agree with you that the gazelle has to find a way to free themselves. Yeah. So we're not saying that Africans not do anything, and they shouldn't be doing anything. No, we're saying let's consider the conditions. Let's be clear about the conditions we're operating in, and then let's design a strategy. Yeah. Without a strategy, we're not going anywhere. Yeah. And this limited agency will not take us there. So, Nadej, I would like to expand a bit more on the idea of that, or I just want to ask you, how do you think that the logic of extractivism can be addressed?
Thank you for this question that I'm not sure I can answer. I think I was listening earlier to you saying that you have 10% critique and 90% implementation.
In action.
I think for me, that's probably, as a stereotypical academic, it's like 90% critiquing and then trying to figure out what the solutions are. I think it sounds like an idealistic way to think about things, but if we go even just to the latest COP30 that was just concluded a couple of weeks ago, and the key word there I think was implementation. And unfortunately, there was no consensus on actually how to phase out fossil fuel use. So extractivism is so fundamentally anchored in our market system that I suspect that if I had the answer to your question, I could be in many different rooms right now. I actually want to link this back to the earlier provocation about the Cameroonian president still being in power, because within an international context, it is extractivism that is still keeping people like him in power. And as much as we think about sovereignty and within the international system, I'm thinking about the title of Stephen Krasner's 1999 book, Sovereignty, Organized Hypocrisy. I think we can say the same about how we deal with democracy. I saw last week that Emmanuel Macron was in Gabon, hosted with all the glory after this president has taken over in a coup. And similarly, we've seen that the EU is perhaps going with a deal that it had with Rwanda on critical minerals, even after condemning Rwanda about their involvement in the M23. All of this has to do with extractivism and with the power of the market, which actually would lead all of these Western partners who are quick to use the rhetoric of democracy to condemn African states, but are very quick to go back to working with them. So I think unless we can actually find a way to decenter that extractivism, I am afraid that I don't have any clear solution.
Could I ask you a question?
Yes.
So, again, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, right? And trying to bring this back home. So we talk about Macron and who have their own state interest, their own personal interest, or whatever it is that makes them want to back up, bankrupt rulers, the leadership problem that we have in Africa. What are your thoughts on using the momentum that states that host these minerals, communities that host these minerals? We saw with Niger Delta, when they had the Niger Delta, I forget what they were called in those days, and then the state tried to buy them out or co-opt them by granting amnesty and giving them some pittance or training them or whatever it is. But that these communities increasingly, they've shown that sometimes actually, if they can speak with one voice and not have one selfish self trying to determine the rest of the self, right? That they can actually, frankly, it's on their land, unless you bomb them or whatever, or you do what some of the Chinese people are doing, militarizing some of those communities. You can't come without their permission. How do you think that we can begin to catalyze, or even leverage some of the pressure in those communities to reorient our citizenry to reclaim democracy as a government by the people for the people? Because we blame our leaders. We blame the 92-year-old. We blame all the other people. But frankly, for me, the buck stops with the citizenship. And we've not had much of a conversation about the followership and what we can do to do more in that context.
Thank you so much for that question. I actually think this is exactly where we need to be going in terms of participatory governance. So when I ask us to actually rethink the principle of the permanent sovereignty over natural resources, there is a line that says sovereignty of peoples and nations in that principle. Unfortunately, the way it has been implemented, it has tended to isolate the state from the people, whereby you do not have enough community-level grassroots participation in a lot of the decision-making. So exactly what you're saying is what I think we should be doing. So I'm working on my book on this very issue, where I conducted field research in Gabon, Ghana, and South Africa, looking at how governments were actually dealing with the governance of the natural resources while looking at global norms, because I am in international relations. And one of my most favorite findings to date was about my fieldwork in Ghana, actually, where I kept asking people based on this assumption of what we understand by extraction. If you think about extractive resources, you're thinking about mining, oil, and gas. So this is what I took with my Canadian PhD thesis in the making, and I went into the field. And as I kept asking, so I was asking questions to a lot of state leaders, corporate leaders, but also civil society organizations, including grassroots organizers. And quite a few times from the beginning, I kept hearing discussions that wanted to center forestry and fisheries. And I would say, no, I'm just talking about extractive resources. And at some point, one of the very kind and at that point very frustrated grassroots leaders told me, we define extractive industries as including forestry and fisheries. And what was interesting for me at the moment, and I saw the difference a few years later, is that they actually incorporated that into the Ghanaian understanding of extractive industries as they dealt with the global level extractive industries transparency initiative. And so for me, that's actually a powerful example of localizing norms that actually wouldn't have happened without the grassroots feedback. So even beyond just even being on the streets, etc., I think just having people participating, the reason why they centered forestry and fisheries is that this is their primary livelihood, and that's actually what was affected the most. So I'm just agreeing with you that we just need more of that.
Yeah. So
Okay, so just 1 second. So Leona is going to have 1 minute, just 1 minute to say something about participation. And then after that, we're going to go to Shari. But before that, Ben is going to say something about how everything is going to fall. So just Ben, 1 second. Let's just give Professor one check on that 1 minute, then it goes to you.
Exactly 1 second?
Hold on. Okay.
Okay. Please.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we said in the beginning,
I did press it. I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we need everyone who is here. You've heard so much. I am still concerned about their suggestion that when the audit report comes, we should go into some African deliberation, because when my chief is in there and he says, forget about that corrupt person, don't touch him, then I am, okay, they will tell me what the answer is. You have questions, so just get ready. We need you now. If you have something to say, to just raise your hand. When you raise your hand, we are going to take your names, not for any bad reason. And then when the time comes, in an orderly way, everybody who has raised their hand, and those who are online putting their points on YouTube comments, we are going to make sure we incorporate you into the discussion. Okay, over to you, Professor Tiki.
yeah, so I'm going to just elaborate on that earlier. Basically, two things. So first, I think that what I was talking about earlier is, maybe 10% complaining, 45% of time thinking about solution, and then 35% of the time trying to do something. But because there need to be a push for institutional innovation so that we can move, we can strengthen state capacity on the continent. And the project I talked about earlier is exactly staff-only meeting. So the mayor is not there, politician is not there, so that people will not feel threatened. People can feel free to express themselves and find collective solution, So, I mean, I'm using this example to just stress that participation is key, but we need to be super creative in how to nurture and to develop participation. For instance, participation starting with some key fact to direct discussions. Participation starting with a motivational speech to get people to see where we are, what we need to do. Participation ending with a vote, or with women speaking last, whatever. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of variation, a lot of institutional innovation that need to take place to make the participatory governance principle effective. And this is what we need to push for, in the academic community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Wanchinkan. So now we are going to go to our respondent. We go to Shari Spiegel, who's Director of Financing for Sustainable Development Office, Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Ms. Shari, you have the floor.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you so much, and thank you to OSA, and thank you to the Undersecretary General to invite DESA to be part of this discussion. It's been incredibly interesting, and I've learned a lot this morning. At the UN, as you know, one of the main focuses is the development pillar, and within that, there's a big discussion always looking at the national, regional, and global levels. As was stressed this morning already, the national governance, national policies are critical, but they are shaped and defined by the global context. And so a big part of the discussions at the United Nations, bringing everyone together, is how that global frame looks. In the Department of Economics and Social Affairs, we have 3 pillars we work on. One is the multilateral discussion, looking at negotiations on framing the international architecture. I work in financing for sustainable development. We just had a big conference in Sevilla last July, where the main focus of countries was really thinking about the international financial architecture in particular. I'll say something about that in a few minutes. We also focus on analytical work to support the member states in their negotiations. And I think one of the differences of the UN in that work than some, for example, the Bretton Woods institutions is we really aim to bring in all voices, to have a different perspective, working with academics very much so. And in fact, we are building an academic track for the Financing for Development discussions. So I look forward to reaching out to some of you as we move forward to be part of those discussions as well. And then a third piece, then maybe I'll say something about at the very end, is also on capacity development. But I was going to start on the multilateral discussions, but maybe having heard your comments, I might start a little bit with the analytical work just to stress why it's so important. And maybe an issue was with the Washington Consensus that was brought up earlier. You brought up issues of privatization, trade issues. If I can just add there was one additional issue that's still very much part of the discourse on market discipline. And even though everyone understands that the Washington Consensus did not work, so many of those same issues are still part of the thinking and part of the way the international system works. And this really is highlighted in the debt area, where everyone knows that the best way to get out of a debt crisis is to invest in your future. You cannot invest if you are using all of your resources to pay back your debt, and you cannot invest when you have austerity. And yet the solutions that are given to countries still from the international system are still to cut when you're in a debt crisis, which is the absolute wrong way to actually get out of it. So there needs to be a rethinking of much of the work that's happening, and those discussions are ones that we have in the UN continually, and every year we have a Financing for Development Forum. You are all invited to come to that as well, to April, to be part of that discussion on alternatives and ideas. So in terms of the, and just to add also that that's even more important today than it's ever been, because when you were talking about the 1990s and the crises that happened, we now have, systemic risks have increased and will continue to increase exponentially. Climate risks, as well as changes and climate shocks, as well as changes that happen from technology that are changing the underlying developmental models, and meaning that old developmental models that worked may not work the same ways or not work at all anymore going forward. And so there needs to really be a rethinking of the model and the structures that we do in this changing world, and we're not really there yet in terms of what the solutions are, even if we had the governance to put them into place. In terms of the multilateral work, as I mentioned, we just had a big discussion in a big meeting in Sevilla in July to look at the international financial architecture and to examine and come up with international agreements on some areas to move forward. Some of the areas that were highlighted, and I'll mention some that were highlighted in the agreement and also highlighted, really pushed by the Africa group, which as a negotiating group really has become has really taken a lead on many of the issues and bringing them forward. One is on international tax cooperation. So it's, as was mentioned, illicit financial flows and other issues, and money being moved from one area, asset being moved from one area to another, that what are the norms and the international agreements to allow countries, that give countries the space to actually be able to tax in their own jurisdictions. And most of those norms have been set in the OECD, the group in Paris, which is mostly wealthier countries, and the Africa group brought to the United Nations a negotiation for a framework convention on international tax cooperation at the UN, where countries can, and particularly developing countries, can bring their interests into the norm setting in a way that hasn't been done to date. So that's a big part of the discussions that we're having. A second area is the area of debt, as I said, and when countries become indebted, heavily indebted, and are spending 70–80% of their revenues to support their debt servicing, what are the solutions that and often, yes, countries raise that debt themselves, but then there were also international shocks, climate shocks, other issues that cause the debt sometimes to spiral out of control that are not necessarily the country's own doing. And when you have a debt contract, it is both the creditor and the debtor that are taking risk and are both have responsibilities as they enter that contract. And how does one change and shift the system to be able to support countries when those shocks happen? And again, the system does not have solutions yet, but there are conversations that are ongoing, and one of the outcomes of the Sevilla Agreement was to have a process on debt at the United Nations where all countries can come together to work towards solutions. And there are some other specifics that obviously I don't have time to go into. So finally, the other big underlying all of this is, of course, the governance issue. Particularly at the UN, every country has one voice. In the international financial institutions, they were set up, the governance structures were set up a long time ago and have not changed substantially to give, so that, for example, the major shareholder at the IMF still has a veto power. And so underlying that is this question of governance and governance reform. These are questions that are not easily solvable, that have been discussed for a long time, but nonetheless, the question of how does one over time change the structures to give countries more voice is critical if we're going to be able to redefine the rules of the international system in support of countries, developing countries and countries in Africa. So I want to just end with one comment on development cooperation, on capacity development, because that's part of our work. And yet, often, I from my experience, even before coming to the UN, the thinking about capacity development, the way that it works best is when we don't call it capacity development and don't think of it as development, as an expert coming in to bring ideas to someone else. It has to be a peer discussion where some bring expertise from their experience and their research and their studies, and other countries, and the people within the countries bring the expertise of what that means in their countries, and you bring together in a discussion. And too much of the way we do capacity development is bringing in experts with the answers that are probably not going to work in the local context. So within the UN, I think we are beginning to have a conversation of how do we change the way we think about that, and how do we change the way we do capacity development. And it's also something, again, that I think deserves a broader discussion to think about how do we reframe the way we're thinking about working together to bring expertise and share expertise in ways that can actually be effective and have change. So thanks so much for allowing me to share my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Shari. Leslie would like to ask you a question, and I will suggest that it be brief in 30 seconds.
Believe me, if
And the
anybody has
answer will
shown
be,
brevity,
and the
it's
answer
me.
will be a minute.
Okay.
Thank you.
Could you please help me understand how then you share learning with the World Bank and the other institutions?
With the World Bank, yes. So with the World Bank, Turn red. Great. Okay. We have a task force that we work very closely with the World Bank and the IMF, actually. So we have a task force, interagency task force on financing for development. We started in 2016, I think, after the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was part of this process of financing for development, where the World Bank and the IMF are co-leads with us. And that means that we have 7 chapters on domestic resource mobilization tax, private finance, development cooperation, trade, debt, systemic issues, and now technology. And on all of those issues, we work with them and we share ideas with them. And we all have to agree, and we don't always agree. So there are big differences within the task force, but we actually work together to see where we can find agreement, where there are disagreements. And so there's a real discussion that happens between the institutions. And most recently, many of the other multilateral development banks have actually asked to join or to work with the task force as well. So there is a continuing strengthening of those discussions. And this FFD process, I think, is one where we can take the ideas and actually have an open conversation with institutions on those issues. Thanks.
I'm glad that you say that there are disagreements between you and the World Bank sometimes. We need to have those disagreements if we want to believe that the UN will help in any way. So this is a great conversation that we're going to continue with the public. There are so many people who want to ask questions, make comments. I strongly suggest that you keep them within the limit of 1 to 2 minutes, no more than that, because again, the list is very long. So the first one that we'll call is number 349. 349.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Professor Seth Azuma, founder and CEO of Global EduPro Solutions and State University of New York, distinguished teaching professor of political science and Africana studies. I'd like to thank the panel and also Madame Duarte. I've seen you here many times, and also in Cabo Verde last month or so. You take your work very seriously, and we thank you for your leadership. As we gather together here and thinking and talking about the transformation of the nation state or the state itself, we have been reduced to the notion of thinification, as if the state is a thing. We have not gone to the basics of what make the state the state. For example, 4 properties of a state: general populace, governance, territorial area, recognition from other nation states and entities. But we just reduce ourselves to governance and their performances. So there is an intergeneration epistemology, a question of that. We have to address it as I work in Africa and also in the diaspora. That produces epistemic violence and epistemic injustice to our new graduate student coming up if we have not identified what is the state itself and what we are trying to transform. So to the panel, what can you do as an academic? I think we have to have that justice as a beginning point or a point of departure so that we can understand what we are doing at this premise. What can we do to decolonize our thinking about the state and decolonizing global hegemonies and academia itself? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to 473 in the room. Number 473. What? Yeah, please go ahead. Introduce yourself, say your name, and then 1 to 2 minutes, please.
Turn on the mic.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Nelly. I am an international student at Harvard University. Thank you for your various contributions. My question is, how can the transformation of the African state restore citizen trust and create institutions capable of responding sustainably to the challenges of governance, inclusive development, and economic sovereignty? Thank you.
Thank you for the brevity of your question. We're going next to 351. Please say your name and then your question or comment in 1 to 2 minutes, please.
Okay, hello. Thank you guys so much for all of your wisdom and all of your knowledge. My name is Wen Manegde Petrepa. I am a student at New York University. In terms of solutions, I've been thinking about an idea for a bit, and that would be, hypothetically, if there were to be created a bank, an international African bank that negotiates economic partnerships with the IMF, the World Bank, and other institutions. From what I understand, mostly what economic exchanges happen between African nations and the rest of the world is based on natural resources, and thus this bank would be able to kind of, in a way, manage the natural resources of the African continent. I was wondering, in that case, if the African states who are part of the World Bank and the IMF, who negotiate within those institutions, would no longer be a part of those institutions, but a part of the bank. And the bank will represent the nations instead and negotiate with the IMF and the World Bank from outside of those institutions. If that institution were to be created, what do you think would be a pillar, an institutional, critical, or intellectual pillar that would allow an institution like that to function and work?
Thank you. So we're going to take 2 more or 3 more, and then we answer. We were going to respond a few and then go back to the room. So the next person we're calling is 422. Please go ahead.
What happens is keep your hand up, and then the technician will turn your light from green to red, and then we can, perfect.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I just want to acknowledge and thank USG Duarte and the panelists as well for convening this conference. My name is Elena Bertuzzi. I'm a partnership officer at the International Fund for Agricultural Development here in our liaison office in New York. For those of you who might not know, IFAD is a specialized agency and of the UN and an international financial institution. And what we do is basically we channel investments from different resources, private and public, to support governments' efforts to transform rural economies and food systems. Africa, for us, represents the largest regional portfolio, with around 60% of our resources going to the continent. We work directly with governments who are in the driving seats and basically design the project based on their government priorities. We also work with research and academic institutions to design policies and support governments. Just to give you an example, we have recently started collaboration with Academia 2063, a Pan-African research organization, to jointly promote agri-food systems transformation across Africa. This is just one example of how we work in the continent. But I do have a specific question for the panelists, also considering the conversation we had yesterday. If you have the possibility of sharing an example of a good practice of partnership that you have had as part of academic institutions with an international organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next one will be our friend Eob, 337. Please, 1 minute, please, or 2.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and I really appreciate all the conversations that happened further. And I have two points. One of the key issues that continue to emerge in our conversation is the issue of agency and African agency. And I want to challenge that. I think we need to be quite critical about such conversation, because the agencies, the African agencies that we are talking about, I agree with understanding also the conditionalities within which that this agency is exercised, because we have still this epistemic, historic, structural, and institutional bottlenecks. And the agency is also constrained by a consciousness that has normalized colonial logics, colonial education, colonial patterns of production and consumption. So unless we question that, agency by itself is neither good or bad. It's only how we exercise it, and I think there has to be a deeper reflection on that. My other comment is related to the intervention from UNDESA on the financing development issue, which is also part of the issue that I read earlier. one of the fundamental problems that we have is we almost use the same paradigm, the same epistemic architecture and knowledge framework that has created most of the problems that we are outlining here as a framework to produce the solutions. That paradigm shift is still yet to occur. We speak about it, but I think we are still constrained. And one example with this regard is all this idea of financing for development. Several studies have already highlighted how unfair trade relationship, the extractive nature for the natural resources, or the debt crisis, the illicit financial flows, the disregard for the African state, and the valorizing of the private actor as part of the problem. But most of this financing for development conversation still continue to use to prioritize the logics of the market, making profit from this investment, from this entrepreneurial engagement as a way of addressing all the big problems that we already have. I don't see that paradigm shift happening within these processes. And I want to have more conversation, conscious and deeper, honest conversation on these issues.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next one is number 501. And after your intervention, we are going to have some responses here from the panelists and then go back to you. So 501, please, in 1 minute.
Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Cliff Uber Cordero, a doctor. I am an assistant professor of political science at Morgan State University. And the question I have is regard to the role of supranational entities, especially the African Union and other regional bodies, with regards to how they can help strengthen the state system in Africa with regards to economic and political maturity. The reason I ask this question is in recent times we've seen cases of coup d'etats that go against the premise of what we want to have a conversation on how to strengthen the state, because they weaken democratic gains, but they also offer alternatives that are not long-lasting in most cases. So I want to know how the panelists are thinking about the role of regional entities such as the African Union and other regional bodies with regards to strengthening the state and encouraging cultures that are helpful to the state performance over time.
Thank you. So we're going to offer some answers, some response to have this conversation between us. And I will turn on to Nadesh Kompaore, if answer whatever question you thought was addressed to you, and however you want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All so many rich questions. I think I'm going to pick one, which is perhaps actually the first question that we had about, I think if I understood correctly, you're calling us to task perhaps for, in our discussions, reifying the state in a way. And I think what I really appreciate in the commentary and the question is the most difficult one, how to decolonize our understanding of the state. I think that's a very important one, because as we even think about the notions of the state that Africa has inherited, we have such a, this very Weberian notion of the state monopolizing, the legitimate use of violence. And when we look across the continent, that is clearly not the case. If you think about informal governance, you think about shadow governance, it's very hard to locate that understanding of the state within it. I think it's an important point because it means that we are leaving out a lot of dimensions, including traditional governance, that in many states, I would say probably in all countries, there is varying degrees of traditional governance, whether it's as centered in some countries or decentered in other countries is not really the question, but the fact is that they exist. And in a way, they don't actually get included in a lot of these discussions. We had a question just now about the African Union, for instance. I think there isn't much room in that very Western state-centric system that the African Union represents. So I would say that perhaps one thing that's, I'm happy that we have someone who's a historian on our panel from the introductions. I think I've been more and more interested in trying to understand pre-colonial Africa, but that makes it much harder because most of us, I'm trained in political science from undergrad to my PhD, we don't tend to actually look as deeply into that. But because there is also a risk to romanticize the past. Ali Mazrui had called this romantic gloriana and romantic primitivism, where you tend to, when you want to show what Africa used to be before the colonial contact, show how, glorify how everything used to be. But by going to a historical and a more historical context, what I'm suggesting is that perhaps in understanding how some of these traditional institutions that have managed to stay around actually evolved. And that would take a lot of resources in oral history, in our in institutions even, how to decolonize academia, whether it's on the continent or in the diaspora. So I guess, again, as an academic, I'm returning with more questions, but just to emphasize the fact that I do think there is more historical work needed to be done there before we can actually see how to decolonize our understanding of the state.
Thank you.
So,
Rofachenko?
yeah, okay. That I've taken, that I expressed in my introductory remark, is embracing technological progress to fix states. And I gave examples, but for instance, state capacity is stronger in places where you have 3G coverage. Just the presence of 3G coverage, for instance, solve the problems of people facing food insecurity, being able to communicate what's happening to them so that you can have quick response. And today, with the explosion, with the big progress in digital technologies, for instance, it's a huge opportunity to invest in making governance more transparent, making governments more effective. So now, in terms of knowing about African history, we should just stop talking about history is important, we need to go back. We need to be more specific in how we use African song, lyrics, arts, how we try to reconstruct like or maybe one community in Nigeria in 18th century, 19th century, in a way that that people can really understand where we are coming from. You see what I mean? So, and today the knowledge exists, the technology exists. I came across an article on parliaments in 18th century Benin, and there are a lot of innovation that we can learn from. For instance, during the meeting of the National Assembly, they turn into musical festival so that there is some kind of cultural communion between communities and stuff. Another thing that they do, they randomly pick a number of people from places to come and ask questions to the representative. So for me, it's not the past is good or bad. It's learning specific things from the past that we can use to edit the current state so that it more contextualized and at the same time is more effective. On the issue of agency, I think when you push for agency, you are not minimizing the constraints. But you need to say, at the end of the day, there is value of taking ownership. There is a value of investing in your own future development. And then not only we need to do it, but before we do it, we need to know what the constraints are and think about how we overcome it. You know, so I think I don't think it could be controversial. The need to mobilize, individual and collective agency for state transformation and for development. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Want to go, Leslie?
So, yeah,
Yes,
just to add to what he said in response to you, that the notion of agency, I think, implies the existence of constraints because you're pushing against something, right? But you're encouraging us to put it on the table just like he did for us so that we contextualize it. And thankfully, he did that for us as well. And then going back again to the point he made about technology, he talks about leveraging existing technology. I actually keep saying that if we could really look to our indigenous technology, so much of what we had have been appropriated by the West and patented. Look at swipe technology. For so long, the stuff they used to do, I didn't have one of these touch phones because it used to give me goosebumps. It was like divination, like a wafa, and somebody has patented it. That was what our native doctors used to do and all that. And look at eHarmony. It takes, credit for how many % of marriages in the US. And, my younger ones are paying to have, but they won't take my recommendation. This is what we used to do. And it was called primitive. Ife Amaduma wrote the book about male daughters, female daughters. It was about surrogacy, right? Look at reproductive technology. We wrote the book on that way back, but it was primitive. So what I'm saying is going back to building the capacity of our younger ones for STEM, so that they shine their eye well and see where the opportunities are and begin to look also in-house to see social network, the Facebook or whatever you people, I'm not on any of those social media or whatever. That was what we used to do. Some TikTok or what, that was what we used to do. And some of these things, we can use to mitigate the so-called dysfunctionality of the state if we worked hand in hand in a much more systematic way. Then coming back just specifically to some of the questions, the professor from SUNY mentioned the importance of paying attention to the fundamentals of statehood. You talked about territory, population, government, recognition. Territory, of course, is a given, and my sister talks about how because of our rich territory, we have been the liabilities of our rich territory as well. But it boils down to leadership and followership, that the government is not doing the right stuff, that who recognizes the government is acting in collusion with the government. Good practices of partnership between academia and international organization. I think one of my rite of passage was going to work at the World Bank. They had a secondment program where in 1999, they recruited me for 1 year, and I went in there and fled for my life and came out to academia. But it was a good one because it really wizened me. It opened my eyes to the realities. It gave me an opportunity to do work that I probably would not have been able to do. How can transformation restore citizens' trust? How can citizens also sit up to their responsibility? Trust is, again, like respect, it's reciprocal. And we have to figure out how to, just do very, very African stuff of reciprocity. The hypothetical about creating an African bank, I think we already have the African Development Bank. And the question is, how can we get them better healed? And then the role of supranational entities. All these are different dimensions of the same question. And we're very grateful that you were listening as keenly as was shown by your questions.
All right, so my turn. Okay. So I would like to go back to the question one, because remember about the structure. And what I did, so I'm going to pick up what I left, when I left off earlier, and to answer some of the questions directed to me somehow. So we didn't discuss the transitional order. So I end up at the liberal international order, the unipolar moment. The unipolar moment where the United States was the hegemon. We are no longer there. We are transitioning out of that. In fact, that liberal moment, international order, ended around 2015, 2017. So from that moment we entered the transitional order, we are still in there. And how is it defined? The United States still there, of course, dominant power. Obviously, we know about the emerging China, ascending power, and Russia, and a few other countries that want to play a big role, whether we like it or not, the North Korea and Iran and Turkey and all that. I want to kind of remind, oh, by the way, let me also just say this. The idea, the project of transforming the state is a two-level game. Game one is within the state. So the state itself, African states will transform themselves. So whether we need democratization, whether we need to get rid of the extractivism, that's what we need to do. Whether we need to increase the agency of individuals, we need to do all that at a state level. But then we consider the international factors, right? And when considering international factors, I would like to call our attention to two things that the United States is very good at doing when they want to enforce compliance. They go through financial institutions, World Bank, IMF, okay, restructuring the debt, loans and all that, we are trapped. The other things that the United States is very good at, and we see that with our current president, right, it is the military order. Now, Africa is militarily occupied from north to south, east to west. There are military bases almost everywhere. And so it's easy to engineer change, to force compliance when there are presence of military. And by the way, when we say military bases, we're also talking about the CIA and others. And by the way, it's not just America, right? Because again, in this transitional order, other countries have emerged. So in the same continent, it's not just the America, it's also the United States. Russia is in there, China is in there, Turkey is in there. And then we know the intervention of countries like Qatar. So again, the African state has to operate in that environment. I want to give an example, and this is a good anecdote to explain this constraint that African state faces in the current international and transitional order. And I want to quote President Macron of France. November 2024, he said, and he's talking about the European Union. The European Union, that is a club of wealthy countries. But he's talking about the limited agency of the European Union in the current context. This is how Macron described the world. The world is made of herbivores and carnivores. And we, the European Union, we don't want to be the herbivores, because currently that's what we're about to. We are almost herbivores in the current context. The European Union, not France, the entire Union. And he added, we don't want to be the herbivore. At least we should be omnivores. So if Macron is saying that about the European Union, what is Nigeria? I want to ask. In that context, in that global context, what is Cape Verde? In that global, where's Cameroon? With a 92-year-old in power, right? You will be crushed. You can disappear. Now I want to jump out the African Union. I'm thinking about Agenda 263. It's a program with good projects, but there is no strategy. When you look at the whole thing, you don't see a strategy to considering the international order I'm talking about. How do you survive that? So we're talking about solutions here. So we need to tell. Hopefully we'll have that conversation with the policymakers in the continent, this group and other group of academics, that we need to find a way to enter into an African order, right? Where we need to maximize the agency of African states, collectively, because again, what is Nigeria? What is South Africa? We just heard from the American president that next year, South Africa will not even be invited to the G20. We also heard from the same president that said, we will rescue Christians in Nigeria. We will rescue Christians in Nigeria, and asked the American military to get ready, and he said it will be quick, it will be vicious, and it will be sweet. So my point is, there is no difference. A continent that has been colonized, I don't want to go back to slave trade, to the Atlantic slave trade, but a country that has been colonized, neo-colonized, still doesn't have a defense mechanism. So I'm submitting to you that the African states need to find, collectively, ways to defend themselves. And that is, there's a number of conditions I'm just going to mention two. Well, lift the colonial borders. Start with lifting the colonial borders and create an entity, a powerful one entity. Is easier said than done? Yes.
ECOWAS?
I'm sorry?
ECOWAS?
Not ECOWAS, the entire continent. Lift all borders.
But we have models of those.
We have models, and again, it's not going to be easy. We know that the hegemons are going to do everything to stop us from doing that. The hegemon doesn't want the European Union to be united. They won't let African countries to be united. So all I'm saying is we need to be aware of that. Once you're aware of that, then design strategies to pass this problem, right? I heard, probably it's with you talk about this financial. We need to create the African Monetary Fund. The World Bank, sorry, the IMF, we don't need you. African leader needs to make that decision, and that could be done. So here we're talking about leadership as one important condition, right? To address the solution, to address the issue that you were mentioning, my brother, about the African Union. The African Union is not equipped yet to engineer these changes that we need and provide protection to Africans, right? When I teach this course in my intro, I just sometimes play with my students. So listen, if you have, look at your computer. This is your computer, right? If I snatch it from you, what would you do? Well, of course, you'll try to get it. But hey, if you can't get it, you'll probably have to join forces with others to do it because I might be stronger than you. But that's what some of the things that African countries need to do, the creation of a single state, and I'll end here and go back to you. And that is, there are some blueprints. Some countries have started doing that, whether we like it or not. Whether we like their approach, the fact that they are governed by military officers, right? I'm talking about the Association of Sahelian Countries, right? I'm not very fond of their governance, but I would say in terms of security, they have shown something, right? When Niger performed that coup d'etat, ECOWAS was instrumentalized by the French. The French president was very active in asking ECOWAS to do something. What stopped them from doing that? The fact that Mali and Burkina Faso said an attack against Niger is an attack against all of us. Everything stopped. All right, so sorry, we're going to go back to the public because we need to have...
I'm so sorry, my brother. I'm going to pull rank on you on this one. Okay?
The elder speaking, so I'll bow down to the elder. Please go ahead.
I'm going to pull rank on you on this one. So I love the point it just alluded to the point of the question of indivisible security. And it's an issue that, Your Excellency, I would love to put on your table. It's an issue that got a bad name because Russia, started parroting it. But quite frankly, it's an issue that's overdue for revisitation. Indivisible security. And we can talk about it later. And that was what when Mali and Burkina Faso said an attack against one, it's NATO. That's the indivisible security. But bringing it down to human security as well is an issue that I think is overdue for substantiation, disciplining and substantiation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, that notion of collective security is important. Again, that's what is missing in the agenda, the African Union Agenda 2063. Security is completely missing, and we cannot do without discussing security and make sure that African countries are secure. In my research, I went so far as to say, before we build a one state, a federal state in Africa, I would like to see Nigeria I would like to see nuclear power next to me, next to Cameroon, Nigeria. I'm just provoking. This is just provoking here, but I would love to see that. I would like to see South Africa and also, but it's not just about Nigeria and South Africa and others and other powers, or Egypt and all that, and Algeria.
Can I tell you that when I was Minister of Mines, uranium was not part of my portfolio. We had uranium.
Go figure.
It was a presidential prerogative. So, I mean, there's so much to unpack here, and we're being provocative. We're just basically whetting your appetite on some of those issues.
All right, so going back to you, number 459. Please go ahead.
Wait, am I on? Yeah. My name is Dorothy Davis. I'm the UN representative for the Congressional Black Caucus Institute Global African Diaspora Initiative. I'm going to make a comment for myself. I don't know how CBCI feels, but my question is with the I call it crumbling of the U.S., what opportunities present themselves for Africa? I know that there's a movement now between Africa and the Caribbean, but beyond that, what opportunities present themselves for a new approach and a new system? The second question I have is, how are African states leveraging the diaspora, and I'm including formerly enslaved, the diaspora, in creating this new environment? Thank you.
Thank you. And I would love to answer that question. Number 506. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name is Munir Murkbai. I'm an intern at OSA and a recent graduate from Cornell University. I want to thank the panelists for a very interesting discussion. I would say I want to comment on one of the discussions that was had between the importance of developing technological capacities on the continent, but then also considering the international order. And I just want to say that it's very linked. So, for example, if we look at all of the countries that have rapidly developed R&D capacities, industrialized, specifically China, Taiwan, South Korea, all of these were countries that had a lot of unprecedented policy space domestically. This happened, for them it was a chance because during the time of the world order, the US was trying to curb the spread of capitalism. And so there was an incentive in the US to allow them to have the policy space to develop their own productive forces. So I think the question of industrial policies is really important. And so I guess I have a similar question to my colleague from earlier, in that it would be remiss to not consider the unique moment that we find ourselves in today, where the world order is changing, and where we have the chance to sort of question a lot of the global policies that have been put in place on the continent that have limited trade, trade capacities, or the development of higher value domestic forces. So I guess my question is, what opportunities do you find in this emerging world order where power lines are shifting, protectionist policies are growing? What opportunities does the African continent have to develop its productive forces and to create a sort of state that's more representative, but also has more tools to sort of create an economy that is able to sustain its people? Thank you.
371, please. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for this very interesting discussion. My name is Idili. I work for the Department of Safety and Security here in the Secretariat. And I have two questions. The first one is very general. In many ways, we've already talked about it, but I wanted maybe to elaborate on this topic, which is the structure of development. Because we've been talking about the way forward for Africa and consequently about the notion of development. But we really need to question the meaning and the history of this concept and not to go with maybe the Western or global North understanding of this concept as the default way. Basically, my question is it still possible and realistic in such a globalized context to imagine an alternative and truly African development pathway? And in short, since I think we all agree that tailoring a more African specific development model is a desirable outcome, my question is, does Africa have the international leverage to implement such a pathway? And I have a second question that doesn't have much to do, but it's also very interesting to me. It's about the role of institutions. And so we've touched upon this implicit and sometimes very explicit hierarchy in the international sphere. And I wanted, if possible, the panel to elaborate on the way Africa is viewed, talked about, and talked for sometimes in international settings, and how these discourses shape realities such as policies, partnerships, and diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to my colleague here, Professor Okome. Yes, 336. 336, please. One minute, please.
All right, thank you very much. I've been a bit impatient, and I'm feeling like a dinosaur because, you know, I think there's no historicity in this room. The things we're talking about began to be rolled out in Africa according to a US and UK plan. And it wasn't just Africa, it was the whole global South. I think there was experimentation about how you could do neoliberalism. But as for Africa, I'm sorry I'm going to go on for a little because I'm very frustrated. When we're talking about decolonial framework, what does it mean? So the historicity of structural power within this global international order involves the US and UK agenda of neoliberalism under Reagan and Thatcher, and their use of multilaterals to engender what I call structural violence against global South actors, including African states and peoples. And the politics of the production of knowledge is also involved, and its ethnocentricity. Although we may criticize and challenge the norm, we're still constrained by it because we use concepts, ideas, and paradigms that he has created that have attained the power of being regimes, that is, values and structured ways of responding to things, and norms that guide this international order. So, we are limited in our effectiveness. If you're talking about governance, the World Bank brought governance into the fore. If you are talking about the rule of law and all these things, and their distortion, and in the way they are being implemented, the World Bank and, its what is it called? No, I want to, the Washington Consensus thing. They brought all this into play. They paid people, us scholars, some of them are African, to create beautiful work that legitimated all this. In the meantime, there was an African response, and I'll get to that. But I'm just wondering, as for the DESA, why did you only begin to work with the World Bank in 2016? They had done a lot of destruction by then. In doing so, is there awareness of African resistance to neoliberalism exemplified by initiatives that resulted, for example, in the Lagos Plan of Action or the African Alternative Framework for Structural Adjustment? Are you factoring this into your engagement with the World Bank? Because if you've destroyed something and then you come and you say you want to rescue people, it's like it's medicine after death. That is the World Bank and the IMF. So I also think about the mobilization of bias and the myth of inclusiveness. What does it mean to include Africa? Which Africans? How are these decisions made? Is this an objective and democratic process? I'm just asking rhetorical questions because I could answer this, but we don't have enough time. Is there any awareness of the World Bank's structural power based on US and UK agenda of neoliberalism and the hegemonic role of the US and its use of multilateralism when it suited it to ensure the legitimation of its imperial agenda? Incentives to cash-strapped and ambitious global South scholars, us entrepreneurial, who did beautiful research and publications that have become part of the paradigmatic framing of what constitutes development, what the problems and solutions are, and what should be done. Is there awareness of all this? And let me just reference the Berg Plan. The World Bank was explicit, and one of our brethren, Professor Amoako, also participated in producing this Berg Plan. So there was Africans inclusion. This report is titled, it was created published in 1981, titled Accelerated Development in Sub-Saharan Africa, an Agenda for Action. It recommended that Africans should adopt structural adjustment. That is the only game in town. That, there's economic and political liberalization, they work hand in hand. If you don't do this, you are going to be dead. And there are scholars like Fukuyama who started talking about, globalization, and the world is flat, and all this stuff. There's also Jeffrey Sachs that we all listen to, and what he did in Latin America, So, look, I'm sitting here and I'm so frustrated. That what are we talking about? You cannot use the master's tools to break the master's house. And we are constrained to do so because there's power. They have money, they have power. Actually, it's our money that they're taking. And international law itself is imperialistic because it is about legitimating Western plunder and saying that we don't have any right to have control over our own resources. And then these are the people that are coming to help us. It's their concept we're using. They're saying that we're whatever. And we're sitting here and saying we scholars are going to do whatever. I don't know. I think that we need to remember that there's a history, and Africans have actually resisted. But because of the power of the United States and its allies and these institutions, including the United Nations, because they have the money. They have the money. They still have the money. It's just they're deciding not to spend spend it on the UN right now. It's our money that they appropriated they're using. So let us actually engage reality. Because if you don't look at the power and the structural violence that is going on, we will just be wasting our time.
I agree with you, right? All right, so thank you. We have to move forward. We have to be very expeditious here because we only have 27 minutes to go. Apparently, Ben, there is someone online with an online question. Do you want to tell us what it's about?
Yes. When Professor Okome was speaking, the YouTube lit up. I think they were giving her heart emojis. So we are releasing all the heart emojis. We like your energy. This will fire us all up leaving from here. We have a couple of comments online. Apparently, some young people have organized viewing sessions online as we are here. In a couple of countries, we We have people in a couple of countries who are watching us live, and they are hosting watch parties in Addis Ababa, and youth in Benin Republic. Professor Leonard, your people are following you. And then we have over here from Benin Republic, somebody called Nelekana. I would like to return to Professor Lembertiki's comments. He's talking about a fact. African states do not keep their promises, particularly the state of Cameroon. What are the reasons for this? Okay. And then Aja Stefania in the Republic of Benin. I don't know whether that is in Porto Novo or in Cotonou. Professor Wan Chekon advocates for African culture to be incorporated into African governance. In practical terms, what will this incorporation of African culture into governance consist of? And then one last one from here, if I can get to it quickly. Somebody called Pancras Zunchegbe. That also sounds like Benin. Okay. My folks migrated from Yoruba land through Benin to Ghana, so I can identify with some of the names. Professor Wan Chekon, and here is it possible to make an African mark based on inclusive discussion in governance in a context where in our countries, leaders are constantly coming up with ideas to restrict freedom of expression and criticism? From your perspective as an academic expert, what levers do young people have at their disposal? In your expert academic opinion, what tools do young people have at their disposal to participate critically in governance and be entrusted with responsibilities that reflect their dignity? The hot potato is over to you.
So before we go there, we would like to hear from Madam Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Christina Duarte. Please go ahead. In 30 seconds. Taking longer. Okay. There we go.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good morning to everybody. It was an outstanding conversation. I hope I will take only a couple of minutes. I have 5 comments that I would like to make. The first one, everybody in this room, we might have here 2 generations. I can assure that everybody, every mindset in this room is configured under neoliberal terms. Every mindset in this room. And this became clear when we discussed state, strong state. Yesterday and today, I saw some reactions to the expression strong states. It seems that the neoliberal education make us be allergic to that expression, strong states. I remember that 3 years ago I was speaking and a colleague from UN told me this. Don't say strong states. Nobody likes this expression. Say effective states. But why I'm saying so? And I was discussing here with Jean-Paul. Let me take the example of professor. And yesterday someone made an intervention here. Strong states push back the expression strong states because strong states crash freedom. Strong states crash activism. Strong states crash communities. My perception is completely different. A state that does that is a weak state. It's not a strong state. It's a weak, and I'd like to explain why I'm coming from a completely different. And I would like to take the case of Cape Verde. And I'm very comfortable because to make this speech, because as Minister of Finance, I decrease corporate taxes from 35 to 25. So nobody can criticize that I'm against private sector. On the opposite. So for me, a strong state that, why I say it's a weak state, that one that crashes all these civil society initiatives. Because a weak state is the one that has not delivered education. It's a weak state. When you don't deliver education, you disempower civil society. And when you disempower civil society, the state can easily use as a solution of the problem crashing. So I would like for us in this room to understand the expression of strong state, not the one that crashes, but effective states delivering their main responsibilities. And one of them is empowering civil society by doing what it's supposed to do, deliver education, health, water, energy, digital, and information. My second comment is regarding the states, African states versus democracy. We need to be conscious that not only regarding democracy, but democracy is an example, social protection is another, justice is another. These imported models have been treating Africa as an empty space. We adopt a Western democracy on formal terms because we assume that we have no democracy in Africa. Wrongly. Sorry. I had the privilege to spend all my summer vacations in south of Angola with muilas. And I used to play with them. And I saw how the decision is taken by the chief. Before announcing the decision, you talk to everybody dozens of times, capturing the consensus, identifying the convergence, identifying the common ground, and then announcing the decision. Why you tell me that this is not democracy? Why? So, another example, very quickly, is social protection. When I was Minister of Finance, I received a report saying that the coverage rate of social protection in Cape Verde is very low, was at that time 25%. 25%? Social protection, impossible. Because Cape Verde, as any African society, has traditional social protection schemes that cover your society. So, any African society, I challenge you, the social protection coverage rate is 100%. If you take into account the formal imported model, the universal model, and the traditional ones. But if you close an eye to the traditional ones, you just count who receives the money from the Public Social Protection Institute, you are just getting half of the picture. My question again, don't treat Africa as an empty space from a social protection standpoint, because it's not. And I could go to justice, but I'm not going to justice because I have an expert in the room on traditional justice systems. But as we speak, 95% of the justice in the continent is not delivered by formal courts. Didi, you have put the number in the report. Who delivers 95% of the justice in the continent? Traditional justice systems. So don't treat, again, Africa as an empty continent from a justice standpoint. My third comment, governments versus state. We need to be very careful to mix the entity government with the state. These are two different animals. As we speak, I do belong to the state of Cape Verde. I dare anyone to tell me that I'm not part of the state of Cape Verde, but I do not belong to government. And you need to make this distinction. So sometimes we blame the state, but at the end of the day, we are blaming our specific government exercise political power using the state to discharge whatever he wants, which are, so in my view, is different. What happened in the last 30 years in Africa, I'm not talking about the European country because it's not my expertise, but political parties have crowded out civil societies from the political arena. Once we vote, they tell us, okay, you vote, now we are out of the game. Now we are the owners of the game. So we see that democracies in Africa, and I'm saying not only but also in Africa, have replaced the representative principle with the substitution. When you elect someone, that's when he's supposed to represent you, not to substitute you. And this has been, in my view, making the democracy model a little bit weak. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Undersecretary General. So we only have about 15 minutes to go. We'll take a few more questions in the room, and then we'll wrap up, right? And so going to number 355, please. In 1 minute, please.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Nana Kamisoko. I go to NYU and I study politics and sociology. Thank you all for being here and providing such good insight and thought-provoking ideas. So I wanted to say that when it comes to addressing fragility in Africa, it is very easy to blame government and coups and all that. And I would like to thank Leonard's speech. I think that opened my mind to bring up the point that a lot of solution can be found in investing into human capital and technology, because these are things that we don't normally think about. And I would like to know specifically what type of policy, economic policy, would you suggest, like fiscal expansionary policy or providing more money into schools and technology? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 434. 434.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me good?
Yeah.
Yes. My name is Corey Rowland, and I have a master's degree in global affairs and international policy. Oh, this is good conversation. I love it. Y'all might have answered my questions, I'm sure. But Dr. Limby, I have a question for you. Going back to goals and states, do you think with the World Bank debt and services to Africa, do you think that's a holdup for Africa as a whole, creating one universal dollar? That's one question. And then for Dr. Leonard, when making government work, I didn't hear anything about tribalism within the government. So if you could touch on that. And I don't want to butcher your name, but Dr. W.R., when you talk about resource and governance, do you think, I know you want to get, Africa wants to get the West End out of the continent. I get it. But there's some formats and platforms that can work on the African continent with the right apples. So do you think that format can play a part in certain governance in terms of resources? And that's all I have. And one thing I say is, y'all mentioned Trump. I get it. Midterms is next year. He might not be there. So just go out and vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going quickly to 379. Please go ahead. Keep your hands up, yeah. Go ahead.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Jordan Malamed. I'm a first-year student at Northeastern University. Very quickly, I wanted to thank the panel and all those that assisted in putting this academic conference together, and especially with welcoming the youth to engage with such pressing issues. The question I have touches on the idea of challenging extractivism, as sustainability is a priority by international organizations, such as the United Nations, and is enforced under various sustainable development goals and policy like the 2023 Nairobi Declaration mentioned. How do we turn extractivism dominated by international hegemons into a system that incorporates local communities in an environmentally conscious and safe way? Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. 468, please. Raise your hands to be recognized. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up, please. There we go. You can go now.
Okay. Thank you very much for the amazing panel. My name is Habiba, and I go to the Graduate School of Education at Fordham. My question is around what Dr. Obiora said about institutionalizing the capacity for dialogue. That statement really resonated with me, but I was really curious how we can institutionalize the capacity for dialogue to lead to exhaustive action. And I say this in reference to like the conflict issues in Nigeria, the security issues. I would say that these are issues that have existed for a long time. They come from minor issues that were overlooked for a long time. If those dialogues around those issues had been followed by action that is exhaustive, I believe we wouldn't be where we are today. So I'm really curious to see what mechanisms like that would look like and how we can start to build them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to, this will be the last question from the floor. We are going to start, we're going to wrap up now. We're going to give us each other 2 minutes.
Please do that.
And straightforward, we'll end this, we'll conclude everything at 1, as promised.
Please, let me just quickly respond to her and defer to give my time to Leonard, because he has a real life experience of how dialogue was transformative. Yeah, you're right. I lost my childhood to the Biafran, to the war, civil war. And, you know, we said no victor, no vanquished. And had we confronted our demons then, maybe we would have learned. And because we were so swept away in trying to do whatever model of rehabilitation was sold to us, we never really, there are no Nigerians, we never really built a nation, quite frankly. I am Igbo, you are, I'm taking Habiba, you must be from the north, yeah? And at the end of the day, look at what statehood, let's come back again to what makes a state. Let's take the criterion for population. You know, you don't just bring together all these different groups and expect that you're going to use some magic formula, whether you call it federalism or whatever it is. Look at what other states invest in, you know, being proud to be an American where they know that whatever, however that song goes, and all that, yeah. But we have to start from somewhere. And thankfully, as I forget who gave the illustration, I think it was Madam, our host, who gave the illustration of the African indigenous way of dealing with these things. It's not strange to us. We already have units that we can use to figure out how to start doing that. But like Professor Komi told us yesterday, there are no easy solutions. You just have to roll up your sleeve and get to work. If there's a will, again, they have convening power. The powers that be may not come to my meetings, but they may come to UNGA. And, you know, this might be a side stop for them, and eventually it can grow into a forum, like what's the one they go to in Switzerland or whatever it is. All these ideas. I mean, they want to be invited to Davos. They can be invited to this session. Do you mind sharing with us your experience with your incarcerator?
Yeah. We only have 2 minutes. No, this is very important. So yes, it's possible that I'm standing here today, or I'm sitting here today, because one experience that I had. So when I was arrested in '85, I mean, I don't want to go through the details. It was brutal for 18 months. And one day, one of the torturers came to my cell. And I sat him down and started lecturing him about why torture didn't make any sense. And I was talking to him like a friend. I was not his friend, obviously, but I have the courage to talk to him and explain where I'm coming from, why it didn't make sense. I was trying to be calm as possible. After that, it stopped completely. It never happened after that. And second, it makes me easier to escape, because from then on, he was always seeing me as somebody respectable. It's as if to some degree, some of the military officers were okay for me to leave, because the way they were, like treating me and stuff have changed. So the key lesson here is that sometimes when you create yourself, or there is the space for you to even engage in a dialogue, even with somebody who is your enemy, this could change everything. Even if you don't see the impact immediately, for yourself and for the institution you are part of, this can be something extremely, extremely important. So, this is part of my autobiography that's going to come up, next year, because I have a lot of instances of that type where I engage with the other side, and with, relatively positive impact, not only on the situation, but also on myself, Anyway, so something that I thought might be good to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Compaore, please go.
Thank you very much, everyone, for all the comments and questions. Since we don't have time, I really wanted to take up the question on the diaspora, actually, as my last point, because I think it's important for us all to remember that the Pan-Africanist ideals were always first and foremost fundamentally not only about the continent of Africa, but about its diaspora, united in solidarity and for liberation. So I think it's actually interesting also that question, because I believe yesterday and today is the meeting in Alger on the reparations with the African Union. And I think it's an important point as well, because we've discussed here and there about the youth. And I think in terms of opportunities that the continent has, to use your words, in this crumbling international order, really seizing the power of the youth, especially in digital movements in a transnational way, is a really not only symbolic but very material way to go back to the roots of Pan-Africanism, which was also fundamentally grassroots activism, right? Yes, we had a lot of state leaders that helped push the movement forward, but first and foremost, it was really an activist movement. So I wanted to thank you for that question, and to say that I do think there's a need to actually build in more this discussion on transnational Pan-Africanism in a lot of the African politics discussion. Thank you.
Talk to Dr. Compaore. So we're about to wrap up the conversation today. I have to say that a statement I made earlier was very deceiving. I said that we are going to address all the problems today. We are going to solve all those problems today where we don't have time. So the conversation is to be continued. I totally relate, and I don't know if I want to share that in details, but I totally relate to my brother's story here, because I was also in Cameroonian jails when I was only 20-something years old, right, for college, right, for being an activist, and that's why I'm also here to the United States. So I share that. And one question that I would like to address, I'm happy that you addressed the question of global Africa, as I like to call it. It's not just Pan-Africanism, it's global Africa, whether we think about the diaspora in the Americas, and the diaspora in France, the Algerian, Moroccan diaspora in France. It's a very large diaspora that we can mobilize to address these issues, these questions. On my friend right there about, we don't have time to dive into this, but some of the solution includes monetary policy. So having one currency for the entire continent will change the game overnight, I believe. The last thing that I would say, liberal democracy is not a great proposition. So I totally agree with you, Madam Undersecretary. It's not a great proposition. Liberal democracy spells trouble for the continent. We need to go to a different form of democracy. I'm working on this project. Other folks are working on this project. Now, we didn't solve all the problems, but there is hope. We hear the United Nations convene to discuss the state of Africa, how to transform the state. Great experience. And I want to conclude with one thing on a positive note. I'm teaching two courses, I'm teaching three courses, but two of the courses I'm teaching this semester include politics in Africa, where we discuss the United Nations, and also introduction to international relations. Guess what? When I told this student that I was coming to the UN, so we'll not be in class today, I was supposed to be teaching today. When I told my student international relations, intro international relations, that I was coming to do this and discuss Africa, after we just discussed the United Nations, and nearly half of the class said, we are coming, Prof.
Are they here?
So they are here, and I want to acknowledge them. They traveled from Fairfield University in Connecticut to be here today and spend this time with us. Fairfield students, please raise your hands to be acknowledged in the room. There we go. So there is hope. There is hope that the United Nations can still be a place for this kind of dialogue to continue. So truly appreciate it. Give me 30 seconds. Give me 30 seconds to see how the elders are doing? Yeah. I thought I concluded, but the elder want 30 seconds to conclude. So I cannot say no, right?
No, so
I don't want to be cursed.
There were
move forward.
Oh, sorry. There were several questions from the student from NYU, from Cornell, and somebody online. They asked me direct questions, but please reach out and I will respond to you in details and put you in touch with colleagues that might be able to give you specific answers. Please reach out as much as you can, as soon as you can, please.
With that being said, we yield back to Ben to conclude the conversation, the session today.
Thank you, Professor Lembe-Tiki, Professor Nadesh Compaore, Professor Leslie Obiora, Professor Leonard Wanchekom. Thank you. Can we put our hands together for that? In the next few seconds, tomorrow, Professor Tiki gave us hope. Tomorrow, I hope we get dreams and visions. Because tomorrow we are going to have the Deputy Secretary General here with us. Tomorrow is the... Oh, she's not coming? Okay. Okay. Let's just imagine we will get an AI version of her. But tomorrow is the final day. Under Secretary General is going to be here. And the theme is going to be ideas that build nations, leveraging African scholarship for a new era of policy making. We want you to be here tomorrow at 10 a.m. We are going to conclude 10 a.m. New York time. And we appreciate all of you here, especially those who came all the way from Connecticut. Do they get extra marks for their... Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.